Hello, and welcome back to English Unlimited. If you can understand most of today's podcast, your English is probably around the B1 level. Today, I'd like to ask you a simple question. What's the first thing that comes to your mind when you hear the word deadline? Maybe you think about work, a school project, an important email, or perhaps you think about stress. Many people don't like deadlines. They remind us that time is running out. But here's another question. What if I told you that hundreds of years ago, crossing a deadline could actually cost you your life? It sounds like something from a movie, but it's true. And today, we're going to discover the surprising history behind one of the most common words in English. Let's begin. Today, we use the word deadline to mean the final time or date when something must be finished. For example, my essay deadline is Friday, or we have to finish this project before the deadline. It's such a normal word that most people never stop to think about where it came from. But its history is much darker than you might expect. According to historical records and major English dictionaries, the word deadline first appeared during the American Civil War in the 1860s. At that time, thousands of soldiers were held in prisoner of war camps. Life inside these camps was extremely difficult. Food was limited, medical care was poor, and many prisoners became sick. Around some camps, guards created a special boundary. This wasn't always a tall wall or a strong fence. Instead, it was often a simple line marked inside the prison camp. The guards gave prisoners a very clear warning. Do not cross this line. Anyone who crossed it could be shot. That boundary became known as the deadline. The name was simple. If someone crossed the line, the consequences could be deadly. Of course, not every prisoner crossed it. The line itself acted as a warning. It told people exactly where it was safe to stand. Today, historians still discuss these prison camps and the difficult conditions people experienced there. The story reminds us that many ordinary words have extraordinary histories. Now, you might be wondering something. How did a dangerous prison boundary become the word we use for homework and office projects? That's a great question. The answer is language. Language is always changing. Words often begin with one meaning. Then, little by little, people start using them in new situations. Over time, the meaning becomes broader. That's exactly what happened to deadline. People began using the word for any limit that should not be crossed. Not only a physical line, but also a point in time. Imagine you're writing a newspaper many years ago. The article has to be ready before the newspaper goes to print. There is a final moment when no more changes can be made. You must not go beyond that point. In a way, that time became another kind of deadline. Not a line on the ground, but a line in time. Slowly, more people started using the word this way. Schools adopted it. Businesses adopted it. Governments adopted it. And today, almost everyone understands what a deadline is. The original meaning has almost disappeared from everyday conversation, yet the word still carries the same basic idea. There is a limit. Once you cross it, there are consequences. Fortunately, today's consequences are usually much less serious. If you miss a deadline at school, your teacher may give you a lower grade. If you miss a deadline at work, your project may be late. That can certainly be stressful, but it's very different from the word's original meaning. Isn't it amazing how language changes? One word can travel through history for more than 100 years and end up meaning something completely different. And this isn't unusual. Many English words have changed in surprising ways. That's one reason studying word origins can make vocabulary much easier to remember. Instead of memorizing a definition, you remember a story. And stories stay in our minds much longer than simple lists of words. Researchers who study memory have found that people often remember information better when it is connected to meaning or a story. Perhaps that's why learning the history behind a word can make it feel more memorable. The next time someone says, "What's your deadline?" you probably won't think about a prison camp, but you'll know that this everyday word has traveled through history and carries a story that most people have never heard. And that's only the beginning, because in the second part of today's podcast, we'll look at how native English speakers use the word deadline every day. Learn several useful expressions you can start using immediately, and discover why understanding collocations is just as important as knowing the word itself. Today, the word deadline is part of everyday English. You'll hear it at work, at school, in business, and even in everyday conversations. Let's look at some of the most common expressions. The first one is meet a deadline. If you meet a deadline, you finish your work on time. For example, I met the deadline for my project. Or, we worked together and met the deadline. This expression has a positive meaning. It tells people that you finished before the final date. Now let's look at the opposite. Miss a deadline. If you miss a deadline, you don't finish your work on time. For example, I missed the deadline because I was sick. Or, the company missed the deadline for the report. Notice that we usually say meet a deadline or miss a deadline. These are natural English collocations. Native speakers use them all the time. Here's another useful expression, a tight deadline. A tight deadline means you don't have much time. For example, we have a very tight deadline. Or, my teacher gave us a tight deadline, so I had to work every evening. Now imagine your teacher gives you another week to finish your homework. What happened? You received a deadline extension. An extension means you have more time. For example, my professor gave the class a deadline extension. I'm sure many students are happy when they hear those words. Here's one more expression. Beat the deadline. This doesn't mean you fight with a deadline. It simply means you finish before the deadline. For example, we beat the deadline by 2 days. Or, she always beats the deadline because she plans her work carefully. These expressions are much more useful than learning the word deadline by itself. When you learn vocabulary together with its common partners, your English becomes more natural. Now I'd like you to think about something. Why do so many people dislike deadlines? Is it really because of the date? Or is it because of the pressure we feel? Psychologists who study motivation have found that deadlines can have two very different effects. For some people, a deadline helps them focus. Knowing they only have a few days encourages them to begin. For others, the pressure creates stress, and they find it harder to concentrate. Perhaps you've experienced both. Sometimes a deadline helps you become productive. Other times, you wish you had started much earlier. Here's something interesting. Have you ever noticed that people often say, "I work best under pressure"? Some people really believe this. They wait until the last moment before starting. Then they finish everything just before the deadline. Of course, this doesn't work for everyone. Many teachers and productivity experts recommend breaking a big project into smaller tasks instead. Instead of thinking, "I have one huge deadline," you can think, "Today I'll finish one small part. Tomorrow, another part." Little by little, the work becomes easier. In a way, learning English is exactly the same. Many students tell themselves, "I want to become fluent." But that's a very big goal. Instead, try setting smaller goals. Learn 5 new words. Listen to one podcast. Read one page. Practice speaking for 10 minutes. Those small steps eventually lead to big progress. Perhaps that's another lesson hidden inside today's word. A deadline doesn't have to be something frightening. Sometimes it's simply a reminder to keep moving forward. Before we finish today's podcast, I'd like to leave you with one final thought. The next time someone says the word deadline, I hope you won't only think about homework or work projects. I hope you'll remember that this ordinary word has an extraordinary history. It began as a real line that people were warned not to cross. Over time, its meaning changed completely. Today, it no longer describes a dangerous place. Instead, it reminds us that language is always changing. Words travel through history. They grow, they adapt, and sometimes they leave behind stories that are even more fascinating than their modern meanings. That's one of the reasons I love studying English. Every common word has the potential to surprise us. Thank you so much for listening to today's podcast. I hope you enjoyed discovering the story behind the word deadline. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to English Unlimited for more B1 English listening practice and more fascinating stories behind everyday English words. And now, I'd love to hear from you. What's the biggest deadline you're working toward right now? It could be learning English, finishing a project, planning a trip, or achieving a personal goal. Write your answer in the comments using simple English. I'd love to read your stories. Thank you for listening. Take care, and I'll see you in the next episode of English Unlimited.